What's up, everyone? My name is Andy Zaremba, and I am the co-host of the Vancouver Real podcast. And as you can see, I'm doing something a little different for the intro today because, quite frankly, I didn't feel like driving all the way down to Gastown and setting up in studio to record the intro to this week's podcast, which I actually had the pleasure to do a Skype call with Dr. Robert Glover. And the intro was made to me by Mike Mascari from the Man Talks community. He's actually involved with the Man Talks Mastermind program, helped build it out along with Xander and Connor Beaton as well. And they made this connection because basically Dr. Glover is coming to Vancouver to do a workshop. He'll be doing a talk on September 21st and a full day workshop on September 23rd. And it's going to be for men only because this is going to be a workshop where men can really dive deep with other men and talk about some very personal issues, which sometimes, if you involve both genders, you might not be as comfortable speaking about them. So there is sometimes value in separating, men and women in order to do these kinds of personal work. But Robert Glover is the author of a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy, and this book actually went fairly viral through the men's groups here in Vancouver. And a lot of people who read it really, they recognized how it struck a chord within them. And there's so many traits and characteristics that Dr. Glover was mentioning about men in this book. And it almost sounded like almost every man could relate to it in some way. And that really speaks to how, how men have really kind of fallen off the wagon in terms of what is healthy masculinity. And there's several men's groups in Vancouver operating right now, all trying to establish that same thing, which is, again, healthy masculinity, healthy relationships, at work, within your families, within your friends, with your partners in your relationships. And really, there's no one to blame about what happened with men and why we kind of went off the rails a little bit. It is kind of systemic, and it really all stems down to not being in relationship with men as we're growing up. We're a generation of men that were basically raised by women. And we get into that a little bit at the beginning. And that's a quote from Fight Club, from Tyler Durden, actually. And, this book really, again, struck a chord with a lot of men through the men's groups here and spread virally through it, which inspired this entire workshop to take place. So Robert Glover will be doing a public talk on September 21st and then a full day workshop on September 23rd. And you can find both of those at mantalks.com. And if you'd like to check those out, definitely head up on mantalks.com and you can register for both events. And, if you're a man trying to make his way through the world here in Vancouver, those are some pretty healthy groups to be involved with. In fact, I know the Samurai Brotherhood will be there. I know the Man Talks organization and Man Talks Masterminds will be there. So if you're looking for a tribe to kind of help you through, whatever you're dealing with in life, to help get you moving, those two groups are definitely excellent for doing that. And again, cultivating that healthy masculinity, which Robert and I will get into a little bit in this podcast. But I'm not going to drag this out any further. And I had a really great talk with Robert. We actually ran pretty short on time. We went for about an hour, and I only got about halfway through the notes that I wanted to cover with him. However, it's good not to exhaust the guest sometimes and leave a little bit there for you guys to learn at the workshop and at his public talk. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Robert Glover, go visit drglover.com, and he has his own podcast. He has, of course, the book and different workshops and seminars. He actually runs North American and worldwide even. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Robert Glover. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Vancouver Real. My name is Andy Zaremba, and we're going to just dive right in here today with Dr. Robert Glover. Robert Glover, welcome to Vancouver Real.
Now, good to be with you, Andy.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time today. I'm going to get into the connection and how this interview came about in just a little bit. But Dr. Robert Glover is the author of a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And this is one of those books that really made its rounds, especially through the men's communities here in Vancouver. And it's so funny how these books happen sometimes, because it strikes a chord in just the right way, and guys really resonate with it, and then they tell a friend, and then all of a sudden all the guys in that community are reading the book and having discussions around it. And I think it's something really important. I think the men's, let's say, healthy empowerment movement, if you want to call it that, is very much needed in Vancouver. And I think a lot of guys have been heavily impacted by your book. So thank you for your work.
Well, Andy, it is good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. And I'll tell your viewers, I didn't realize we're going to video before we got here, but as you can see, I'm a close cousin to Vancouver with the Seattle Seahawks shirt on, for those of you who are listening. And I'm actually down in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, where I live. But get back up to Seattle quite often, and as we're going to talk about, I'll be up in Vancouver not too long from now. And, personally, I'll just say up front, I'm gratified to really see and hear how much my book has really had a grassroots spread. We may talk a little bit how I came to write the book during this interview, but I'll just share this. When I was shopping for a publisher back right around the end of the turn of the century, several publishing companies, big publishing companies, editors said they liked the book, but their marketing departments said, men just don't buy self-help books. And I know back when I started on my own personal nice guy recovery about 25 years ago, there was Iron John, and there was some of those, the mythopoetic type books, Michael Meade. But there wasn't much more than that out there. I mean, the books that I were influenced by was, Healing the Shame That Binds You by Bradshaw. A very powerful book I highly recommend is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by a woman, Susan Jeffers. But there wasn't much out there for men. And I went to a men's group, started working on me, and I'm now gratified. The book came out in hardcover in 2003, so about 15 years ago. And now when I see how many men's coaches are out there, how many men's community meetings, online weekend workshops, and how many of these coaches and therapists and men's gurus say, we recommend your book, or we read your book and we study it. I'm thinking, that's fantastic, because that just wasn't there when I started doing my own work. So I'm very grateful it's had that kind of influence, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely struck a chord with a lot of the men in our communities here. And it's interesting because a lot of the guys in Vancouver, I'll speak for the Vancouver area, are very open. And that is a product, I think, of like the education system and how they have been socialized here. However, it is those same, socializations in the education system which led a lot of them to be nice guys. So it's like they've been opened up, and now they're willing to actually do that personal work, which before in the self-help genre, it was maybe more female focused. So it's opened them up to the work, but it also is partially what made them become nice guys, right?
Yeah, so I can see that.
Yeah. So before we actually dive into what a nice guy is, can you tell me a little bit about, where did you get your education from, and what led you into doing men's work?
Okay. This will all segue into what's a nice guy. I'm a recovering nice guy. If you had met me 25 years ago, I would have told you I'm a nice guy. I would be proud of that. I would have thought I'm a really unique male, unique masculine person. In terms of my own journey, out of high school, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I was involved in the church that I grew up in, a fairly fundamental Christian church. So I decided, I think I'll go study to be a minister and perhaps work with families. And got to college, to a private, liberal arts, Christian-oriented school in the southern U.S. Like I said, I grew up in the Seattle, Washington area. And my very first class I took in college was Psychology 101. I absolutely loved it. I just loved kind of trying to understand why people think the way they think, do what they do, feel what they feel, and kind of answer my own internal questions. So I got 2 degrees from that religious institution oriented towards counseling, marriage and family therapy. Worked as a youth minister for a couple of years, went on and then got my PhD in marriage and family therapy. Worked as a minister while I was doing that, and then a couple of years after that. So I had that strong background in the ministry. But it was, once I took psychology, it's kind of like, yeah, I want to work with people. And so when I actually started writing No More Mr. Nice Guy, I was working as a marriage and family therapist in, again, the Seattle, Washington area. And I had actually started going to therapy myself. My then wife, who we actually split about 15 years ago, told me, you got to go get some therapy. I can't take your passive aggressiveness and your victim pukes. And she goes, I'd rather be married to a jerk, because at least a jerk, you know that they're going to treat you bad all the time. She said, you treat me well, you do nice things for me, but I don't know that you're so resentful until it comes out in these indirect ways, and then I don't see it coming. And she said, you go to therapy. And I'm thinking, I need to go to therapy. You're the one that's angry all the time, never happy, moody, never want to have sex anymore. And I'm thinking, I'm a nice guy. I'm doing everything right. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want the marriage to end, so I actually joined a 12-step group and went to therapy. And luckily, right away, started getting in touch with things about me that I needed to work on, like becoming a more honest, authentic person, just telling the truth. I needed to get better at asking for what I wanted and making my needs a priority. Had to learn to set boundaries. And at that time, I was doing marriage and couples therapy, marriage and family therapy, and I noticed that a lot of the guys coming to me in their relationships were saying the same thing I was. I'm a nice guy, I treat her well, I'm better than her ex, I do everything for her, I try to make her happy. She's never happy, she's often angry, she's critical, she's moody, she never wants to have sex anymore. When's it going to be my turn? And I thought, I can finish their sentences for them. Yeah. So I invited about a half dozen of them to meet with me every other week for a No More Mr. Nice Guy men's group. And I said, I'll write you guys some chapters, some lessons of what I'm learning about my own kind of journey of coming to understand myself as a nice guy, how I got to be a nice guy, why it doesn't work, what's a more effective paradigm. So I just started every other week, writing and giving these guys lessons, and they and their often wives and girlfriends kept saying, you need to write a book, you need to go on Oprah. Well, never made it on Oprah, but
not yet.
Not yet. I don't. Does she have a show yet?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, pretty popular one, I think.
Yeah, pretty popular. So, so I ended up writing a book. It came out as an ebook in 2001, and then hardcover in 2003. And as I mentioned, a lot of publishers said, men won't buy a self-help book, but yet the royalty checks keep getting bigger every year. So apparently a lot of men are buying a self-help book.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, it really does strike a chord with a lot of men. And I really liked at the end of the book that I just listened to about an hour ago at the gym. And you were saying that you were having a lot of resistance to finishing this book. Mm-hmm. And it's when you actually drop the pressure around finishing the book, and like that it had to be this big thing and you had to be on Oprah or whatever that looked like to you or to other people. When you gave yourself permission to not finish the book, that's when you actually finished it and published it and it all came out. So I thought that was a really awesome story at the end of it.
And that was powerful, because I just started writing to give chapters to the guys. I mean, I had no problem writing them, but as soon as, this has got to be a bestseller, it's got to have worldwide acclaim, I got to go on Oprah, I thought, man, that's a lot of pressure. And I just found myself avoiding it. I just wasn't working. So I actually went back into therapy to figure that out and just, realize, okay, I'm just going to go back to finishing this so I can give it to my clients. That's all. Right. And that took the pressure off.
Beautiful. Well, Robert, you're going to be up here in Vancouver on the 21st and 23rd of September. And we've actually linked up through the Man Talks community. And our friends over there, Connor Beaton, Mike Mascari, and Xander, have actually facilitated this interview for happening. And I'm really looking forward to it, and I think it's going to be a big hit here. And I want to acknowledge just like all the guys in the Man Talks community and the guys who are in the Samurai Brotherhood, another men's group in Vancouver. who actually just, are brave enough to take themselves on, because it is uncomfortable work sometimes. And I'd like to acknowledge men who aren't afraid to step into the fire a little bit, look at themselves, and try to do something better. Um, it's an interesting story. I'm just going to interject this really quick about how your book actually infiltrated the community here.
Okay, I do want to hear that.
I'm pretty sure this is accurate, so I'm going to just tell my perspective of it. But at our business here, Float House in Vancouver, there's an employee named Riley Knowles, and he was reading your book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, who introduced it to a gentleman named Chris Solacek, who is also an employee at Float House, who was part of, again, that Samurai Brotherhood men's group community, which I was a part of. And it made its rounds through that community, made its way into the hands of Mike Mascari. Mike Mascari was also linked to the Man Talks community and is helping them build out their program and everything they're doing there. And now it's led to you coming up to here to do a workshop and this conversation happening. So it's just so funny. It's, again, that virality of a book when it strikes a chord. It's so funny how it just sweeps through maybe like-minded people. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I love that, and honestly, I know that's how the growth of the book has spread, both virally, both online and word of mouth, just people telling other guys about the book. And you'd be amazed how many guys write me and say, I found your book because either my ex-wife or ex-girlfriend gave it to me, or my wife found it and gave it to me. So men spread the word, but women like it and are giving it to guys as well. So
For sure.
thanks for telling me that. I love hearing those viral stories.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, when was the book published for the first time?
It came out as an ebook, and that's a whole other story in itself. It came out 2001 as an ebook, and then a lot of media publicity was generated around it, and then Barnes and Noble gave me the hardcover contract in 2003. So it almost 15 years ago now.
Excellent. Well, the reason I bring that up is because there was a movie in like 1998 that I became very enthralled with, and I wasn't exactly sure why, but it was the movie Fight Club. Have you seen that movie before?
I've seen it. I highly recommend the movie and the book. In fact, I recommend almost anything Chuck Palahniuk has written. He writes men really well.
Yeah, and in that book, that movie was absolutely geared towards men. And there was something about it. I watched it so many times, and it was probably twofold the reasons I was interested at the time. And one of them would have been the kind of establishment nature of the movie, and then, also the idea of a group of men working towards an end goal in this movie, to destabilize everything.
Yeah.
And it's so funny now on this journey, when I look back and be like, why was I interested in the anti-establishment portion of that movie? And it had definitely to do with some of my own things that I was working through as a recovering nice guy as well. But I wanted to quote Tyler Durden.
And here you are in a button-down gingham shirt talking about anti-establishment. I love it.
Hey, the funny thing is, when I look like a clean-cut guy, nobody really bothers you. You can kind of just get away under the radar most of the time. And
there you go. Good strategy.
Yeah, it works, especially when you're going through airport security. So there's a quote from Tyler Durden in the movie, and it is, "We are a generation of men raised by women." And he says, "I'm wondering if another woman is really the answer we need." And that really struck a chord with me, because it really does speak to just how this nice guy persona or psyche evolved within male populations in North America, especially, I'd say, in the Vancouver area, Pacific Northwest. And it really was, in my opinion, part of it was circumstantial how it came around. It was because of social changes, the advancement to the Industrial Revolution, and then going to, the traditional nuclear family, which led to men being less available to raise their boys, and the disconnect from men and women, and boys being raised by women, and then of course going into an education system where feminism definitely had its roots in there. And most teachers, as you pointed out, are female. It's probably still the same today. So now it kind of leads to this whole idea of men placating to women and seeking their own self-worth through women, instead of getting that and learning about healthy masculinity through the men, because men weren't available. So it's like this all happened as a result of like major social changes. So it's like you can't even get upset with anybody or other men because like it's like it happened because they're born into this. Would you agree with
Yeah.
that to some extent?
Yeah, you've summed it up well, and I was smiling when you quoted the quote from Fight Club, because I've quoted that a number of times as I talk to guys, and for those of who've seen the movie and kind of have the context, if I remember right, the context of that is that the Brad Pitt character is soaking in the bathtub in this old house they're in, and the Edward Norton character mentions wanting to find a girlfriend. And that's when Brad Pitt says we're a generation of men raised by women, and I don't think another woman's the answer we're seeking. While he was fucking the brains out of the woman that was hanging around.
Well, they both were technically. But.
Yeah, and I had to see the movie 2 times, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody to realize it was one person with their dual personalities.
Split personalities, yeah. That's why they both work.
Their alter ego, that's the word for it.
Exactly.
So yeah, it took me a couple times to figure that out.
Yeah.
So, and I said, Chuck Palahniuk writes guys' issues really well. He gets we men feeling alienated and disconnected from men. And another book, the movie wasn't great, but another book he's written I like is called Choke. So I recommend that as well. But I agree with you that, okay, this is the point in history that we have found ourselves as men. I'm 61. I've got a son that is 30, just turned 32. I'm actually now raising a stepson that is 12 down here in Mexico. It's my wife's son. So I've been, involved with boys and men, throughout my own life and as my own life and as a dad. And really the biggest thing is that boys are just growing up disconnected from men and masculinity. And it's nobody's fault. It's not the fault of the media. It's not the fault of sitcoms on television. It's not. I think the educational system needs to change, but I'm not going to blame the educational system. It's not our mother's fault. Most moms, tried to raise their sons. Nowadays, a lot of them raise them as single moms. But here's the point, and here's what I try to point out, is that most of us men have not had men, trustworthy men, to initiate us into the scary, disciplined world of adult masculinity. And so a lot of men, especially the younger men I work with, the phrase I use is that they're spending their lives hanging out in the nursery. They're spending their lives playing video games, surfing the internet, watching television, smoking pot, seeking the approval from women that they're too afraid to actually approach, to date. Just a lot of guys are doing what comes easy. And that's a feminine state of being, to just to be done to just let the world come to you. It's kind of like the difference between push or pull, email. They're just waiting for everything to come. And I love that there are groups like what you guys are doing that are actually creating forms of initiation to get men out of that nursery where we're just seeking that warm, fuzzy validation of mom and sisters and female friends and our other guy friends that don't have a clue how to talk to women either. And I like that we're putting ourselves in situations that challenge us, that get us at our edge, that show us some discipline, that get us out of our comfort zone. And if we can do that in the context of other men and build connection and build teams as we do that, that's the answer. It's not blaming any of the things that put us where we are today.
Absolutely, yeah. Building relationships with other men, I think, is critical. Again, it's like you highlighted this so many times in your book, how that will actually benefit men's relationships with women and their marriages and everything else, And it's funny because a lot of women at first, when they think of a men's group, there is a little bit of like, well, what are you doing in there? Why do you need a men's group? Right? Why are you excluding women? And believe me when I say this, like most of the men's groups that I know of are actually very healthy and they do really good work, which I think will actually benefit women in the long run. But I want to dive into the question, just the topic of your book, the subject matter of your book. And I guess the first question I had for you, I'd like to hear it in your terms, in your words. What is your definition of a nice guy?
Well, kind of the elevator pitch of a nice guy. It's a guy, and usually internalize this belief at a very young age. It's a guy who internalized the belief that he's not okay just as he is. And he either has to become something different or hide those things about him that might garner disapproval or rejection or abandonment from others. And if I was to put in a nutshell what nice guys start out trying to do at a very early age, I'm talking days, weeks, months old as babies and small boys, and we continue into adulthood, is we're trying to manage our anxiety and manage our toxic shame. We're trying to hide from people how defective internally we believe we are by becoming nice, becoming good, becoming a caretaker, a pleaser, a helper, and we're trying to manage our anxiety, that anxiety that comes from looking foolish, making a mistake, failing, upsetting somebody, doing it wrong. And so most nice guys are trying to manage those two things, their anxiety and their toxic shame.
Right. I kind of jumped ahead, but I really liked how you mentioned before, getting in touch with that masculinity is a great way to get men into that forward gear, that forward momentum, and that progress in their life, because that is a truly masculine trait. And it's something that a lot of men, again, that have been more feminized have drawn away from. And I think, like you said, it's like women are going to be definitely more attracted to a man who can go out and make his way in the world and create a life for himself and be active and do something, right? And that's why it's like I think it's so important that women give men the time and space just to be able to do this personal work, and because it will benefit them.
Well, let me give a personal example of that.
Sure.
I believe in it so strongly that I've often said, like I said, my training's in marriage and family therapy. I don't do really any more couples therapy, but I mainly work with men because of my book. But I recently married for the third time, and my wife's Mexican and has a 9 and 12-year-old daughter and son, and I'm parenting again. And my office is here in my home. I've got a gym in my home, and so I do a lot in my home. I got a swimming pool out back, so I do a lot in the home.
Pretty
and
cool.
My wife, does a lot of things around the house. So I'm around my wife a lot, and I love her dearly. But I still need that masculine connection. But I'm in this situation where I'm in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. My Spanish keeps getting better because my wife doesn't speak English, so we speak all Spanish. But I don't know that my Spanish is good enough to start making guy friends, Mexicans who only speak Spanish. Most of the other men in Vallarta that speak English are retirees, and most of them just want to sit around and drink and talk politics and talk about stuff they watched on Fox News. And so I feel that need to have that masculine connection. So I actually recently reached out to a men's coach that came highly recommended to me, had a couple sessions. I'm going to enroll in a program, a 9-month program he has for a small group of men. I'm going to do personal coaching with him. And he said, I recommend your book to everybody. I feel kind of weird giving you coaching. And I said, I need it, and you're highly recommended. And he goes, okay. And just kind of ironically, after I got off the phone with him after our first session, he said, at least twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, get out in nature, just for an hour. Just go be in nature.
That's great advice.
And I remember having just a little bit of anxiety to tell my wife, this coach says I need to get out in nature by myself 3 hours a week. And she started thinking of places I could go. So she was supportive of me doing this work of connecting with a men's coach, joining a men's group online where we'll travel and meet, and just doing the things that connect me more with my masculine. She wants a masculine man. As I said, she's Mexican. She says this frequently in Spanish, but basically to translate, she says, I've got big balls, but I never want my balls to be bigger than my man's. She said, I love it when you tell me no. She calls me Jefe. Every restaurant, which is boss, every restaurant we go in, she tells the waiter, we only need one menu. He's the boss.
Wow.
And this is a strong woman that raised 2 kids on her own. She goes to Taekwondo, Muay Thai. She's a gym rat. I'm not going to pick a fight with her. She'd kick my ass. She's fierce, and she wants her man to be fiercer than her. And she knows that she grew up in a rough life. I didn't. I grew up in middle class Bellevue. And she knows she's probably more equipped to handle shit than I am. But she
Yeah.
still has me on that pedestal that says, I want you to be my man. I want you to be in charge. I want you to be the fierce one. She goes, I can take care of myself, but I never want to be bigger than you.
Well, that's
And
awesome that she's so open about that, and surprise, surprise, a woman actually wants a man that's more masculine than her,
and
right?
she is.
You know, and
Yeah,
like, and again, in this age of like, gender equality and neutrality and all these different gender pronouns which are being thrown around out there, I think it is really, again, okay to acknowledge that there are differences in the genders, and that's just the way it is, and it's okay to step in those roles. It's like, part of our society has really demonized masculinity, and there definitely is a toxic masculinity. Let's not pretend that
there
there
is.
isn't. But at the same time, it's like, sometimes, especially within certain circles, it almost feels like a bit of a crime to be breathing as a man. It's like it's pretty harsh sometimes.
Yeah,
But
stay out of those circles. You don't
yeah,
want
stay
to be
out
in
of those
those
circles.
circles. Because here's the ironic thing. When a lot of times when like I'm on an airplane or in a coffee shop and I'm talking and maybe a woman next to me will say, well, what do you do? And I'll say, well, I've written a book for men and here's what I do and here's what I teach men about dating or relationship. And I'll tell the women, I talk with men about setting the tone and taking the lead and being in their masculine and having good boundaries and penetrating the woman with their presence. And I would say 9 out of 10 women get big-eyed and say, really? You teach men that? Where can I meet these guys? I've had women say, can I come stand outside your office or outside your workshops or will you put up a website? And the thing that I found that I would tell guys, and we don't have to go too far off on this, but so many of us men grew up hearing these messages. Like you say, well, men and women are equal. Well, we are equal, just like the center and the quarterback on the football team are equally important, but they might play different roles and they don't have to trade positions every other down to have equality. And we grew up with a lot of distorted beliefs, with a lot of untested information that did come out of feminism that was untested. I went to grad school in the 1980s to Texas Woman's University, so it was highly
yeah,
feminist. Grad school had men in it. But I had teachers teaching me that as little children we're born as blank slates, we're tabula rasas, and that society imprints masculinity and femininity on boys and girls. Well, there's absolutely no proof that that's true. That was bad science. In fact, it was unscientific. All scientific evidence shows that in general, boys and girls develop differently. Their brains are different, their emotions are different, how they communicate is different. And that's all okay. But here's the thing, just like a lot of us men kind of bought into this way of thinking that has been detrimental to us and hasn't served us well, a lot of women did too.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'll give you a quick example. I remember 15 years ago when I went to New York for the start of my book tour for No More Mr. Nice Guy. I went to dinner with my publisher and a female friend of hers. She was a woman, and their husbands or boyfriends. I don't remember exactly what it was. And here was 2 women in their mid-30s. One was an attorney, one was a book publisher for Barnes & Noble, an editor, I mean. And as we were talking over dinner, and they had their spouses with them, both women said, I've gotten into the whole career thing, successful, but both of them said, I kind of like the idea of having kids and being home with my kids and the kind of the housewife thing. And it's funny because just yesterday on Facebook, people you may know, my book editor came up with 2 kids that look like they're either early teenagers. I'm thinking, I think she went home and started making babies with her husband.
yeah,
So here, the women have bought into it too. So as men, let's not assume that even though women maybe are kind of walking by these same belief systems that we've been, deep at their core of who they are, it doesn't mean they've actually really bought into it. And when you show up with consciousness and presence and honesty and authenticity and you set the tone and take the lead, women are naturally, biologically turned on by that and want to be a part of who you are.
Sure. I mean, and again, it comes back to that socialization that was happening, right? Just because of circumstances of how our society went, right? So it's like the women were taught this as well, and they were kind of bought a bill of goods. And this is kind of where maybe feminism went a bit off course. I think definitely feminism did a lot of great things for women's rights and that sort of thing. But it's like they kind of sold women a bill of goods where you now have to have a career, and if you don't do that, you're for some reason weak or not a proper female, and I think a lot of them bought into that, and they found that path kind of empty. And then usually, by the age of like 30, 35, they're thinking, oh wait, I want to have a family, I want to have kids, and they'll actually drop out of their careers to do that. So, and again, like this has been a systemic issue, I'd say, more than anything.
It has, and let me tell you a quick story, because I like to tell this one, because we men and the women out there that are listening and that are part of our lives and part of the movement I know there in Vancouver, like I said, a lot of us have grown up with belief systems that sound true, because it's what we've heard all our lives. I grew up in a very fundamental Christian church and believed in it because it sounded true. I'd heard it all my life. But I'll tell you a quick story. This was probably 10 plus years ago, when after my divorce and started dating and learned to date, and was having quite a bit of success at dating. And part of my success was I learned to salsa dance. And that taught me how to show up and hold my frame and set the tone and lead. And I remember I think I met her on Match.com. And she was interested in salsa dance. And so I just met her like for a coffee date near where she lived in Seattle. And we just kind of chatted for a little bit, and I said, I'm hungry. I said, this is your barrio, your neighborhood. Where's a good place to go eat? And she suggested a place. I said, okay, let's go eat. And I said, just come with me. We'd both driven there separately. I said, come on with me. And I opened the door, put her in my car. I went and I drove. And as we pulled up, she said, it's right here. You can park on the street. And as we stopped, I put my hand on her leg, and I said, wait for me. I'll open your door. Well, by the time I got around the car, she'd already jumped out of the car and headed to the front door of the restaurant, and was in the front door of the restaurant before I had to close her door, and before I could even open the door to the restaurant. When we got inside, she says, I don't like being told what to do. And I said, well, I don't want to tell you what to do, but if you hang out with me, I'm going to open your door. And she says, no, I don't like being controlled by a man. I said, I have no desire to control you, but if you hang out with me, I'm going to open your door. So we talked a little bit more, and then I had a bite to eat, and then went back to my car. So she had to wait on me because I've got the key fob. But, and I open the door, she gets in, and we go back to where her car is parked. And as we pull up there again, I put my hand on her leg. I said, wait for me. I'll come open your door. And she hops out again, and she goes, I don't want to be controlled. I said, I don't want to control you. And I said, it's nice to meet you. And I thought, that's not going to work. Well, she emailed me right after that, and she said, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I know I came on kind of strong, but I'd really like to see you again. And I thought, well, okay, why not? I thought, okay, so here's what I did. I sent her an email back, and I said, okay, meet me at this restaurant, at this location. We'll go have tapas, and then we'll walk up the street to the local dance place in Seattle up on Capitol Hill. And I said, we'll go salsa dancing. And so meet me at this time, this date. And she said, okay. So here I am. I told her where to meet me, what time, what day, and what we're going to do. Okay, so I am kind of telling her what to do. She meets me. We sit down over tapas, and she says, I just want to apologize again. I just don't like being controlled. I don't like a man telling me what to do. And I said, I don't want to control you. I don't want to tell you what to do. But if you hang out with me, I'm going to open your door. And she, so then we ate, and we went up, and we salsa danced for an hour, hour and a half. So guess what I did for an hour and a half?
You led her in salsa dancing.
I led her all over the dance floor. She had a great time. And then, it was a weeknight, so we both had to, call it an early night. So I walked her back to her vehicle, parked on a side street up on Capitol Hill, and I go to tell her good night, and she wraps her arms around my shoulder, wraps her legs, and basically dry humps me on the sidewalk with her tongue down my throat. And I said, I think this is as far as we can go on a city street right now. So here was a woman whose brain says, don't let a man control you. Don't let a man tell you what to do. Don't let a man do this. Don't let a man. And I just kept leading, holding my frame. And biologically, she just had to get closer to me. It was purely wired into her, regardless of what had been planted up here in her brain.
That's a wonderful story. I think that it just illustrates it so well. And it illustrates too this idea that when people get this idea in their head, they think they want something and they've been told they want something, and then it becomes part of almost their identity and who they are, and they want to stick to their guns. They're like, nope, you're not opening the door for me. I'm not going to take that, let you take control of me or take the lead or whatever it was. But then in more not so obvious ways, you were leading her the entire time, in which case she just loved you for that, right? So
she had a internal biological response to not only me leading, but me holding my frame, not being intimidated, not having an anxiety response, and just smiling every time she said, "I don't want to be controlled." I would just smile and say, "I don't want to control you." And if you're going to hang out with me, I'm going to open your door.
Yeah, and again, that's what a lot of the men's groups here in the city are a big part of what they focus on, is like getting men into that forward gear, taking initiative, and I really think that is just in itself is just a huge step in the right direction for nice guys. So my next question, because we've been kind of like going on stories and everything, and I really like them. It's a great conversation so far. But what would you say are some of the negative characteristics of a nice guy, and how do they manifest in his life?
All right. Well, I give a whole list pretty early on in No More Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah.
Here are kind of the most basic, at least the ones that I could see in myself. Number one, nice guys are not honest. Now, that may come as a surprise to most guys who think that they're a nice guy, that they're a good guy. And it wasn't till, as I mentioned, that I started going to counseling and joined a 12-step group. I went to a 12-step group for sex addicts. Quickly found out I wasn't a sex addict. I wasn't having enough sex to be a sex addict. But I thought, hey, I'm in a safe group. I mean, these guys are all here because their lives are out of control. My life isn't working so well either. And I thought, I'm just going to use this place to just start telling everything about me that I've never said about me before. And I thought, and after a session or two of doing that, it just felt liberating. I just felt free. Now, you got to remember, I grew up in a fundamental Christian church, had 2 degrees in religion. I'd been a minister for 8 years. I thought I was a good guy. But I realized I am just not at all honest. If I think it might upset somebody, or I might have a negative reaction, they might not like me, they may leave me, I would either withhold the truth, kind of massage or manipulate the truth, only tell part of the truth, or misdirect their attention. So number one, I wasn't at all honest. And like I said, I can go on a long time about learning to be honest. So there's one of the problems. Another problem is nice guys won't say what they really want, what they really think, what they really feel. It's part of the honesty issue, but it's just a part of being open and transparent. And for example, when I did kind of after I got divorced, after I divorced the woman I was married to, and I wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy and started dating, started entering into new relationships, I started telling women, here's what you can expect from me if we keep seeing each other. I will be conscious. I'll pay attention to you, to me, to us, and what's going on. I will set the tone and take the lead. I'll show up with a plan. I'll lead. I will be honest with you. Everything I tell you will be the whole truth. You'll never find out that anything I told you was anything less than the whole truth. And I said I will be transparent. You'll never have to guess what I think, what I feel, what I want, where I'm going, what I expect from you. And women all told me, I've never been with a man like that. And I'm thinking, okay, that sounds pretty basic, but a lot of women said they've never been with a man like that. And what I found, as I dated a lot of women, I dated a few nice girls. And what I found with nice girls is they'll never tell you what they really want. I'd say, hey, how about we go do this? Okay. So is that something that interests you? Yeah, sure, fine. If you want to, and maybe I'd even give them 2 choices, and they would never pick one. They said, well, you decide. And after a while being with a nice girl, and also I found out that the nice girls weren't always honest. You might find out they've been mad at you for a while, or they didn't ask for something they wanted, or they said yes when they wanted to say no. And then after dating a few nice girls, I had great empathy for both of my ex-wives for what they went through in my lack of honesty, my lack of transparency, and then my lack of leadership, leading everything onto them. What do you want to do? What do you want for dinner tonight? Do you want to go out and get something to eat? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And I burden women with them having to make all the decisions, of them having to be in their masculine. So those are some ways that personally I've seen, and I've seen a lot of nice guys, a lack of honesty, lack of transparency, lack of leadership. Another area that I see in nice guys is a lot of hidden behavior. And I've often said that, just making a rough estimate, I'd say that maybe 75 to 80% of the nice guys I work with have some hidden, secretive sexual behavior, usually around porn, masturbation, fantasy. And that's because nice guys at a very early age thought, well, I got to hide everything about me that people might have a negative reaction to. And sex is it's a lightning rod in our culture. So most nice guys hide or repress or compartmentalize their sexuality. But it's the life force of the universe. It's got to go somewhere. And it comes out in these hidden, secretive, underground ways. And what I found for a lot of nice guys, if they're single, that tends to get in the way of them actually getting out of the house and going meeting women, because it's easier just to jerk off to porn at home. Yeah. It also gets in the way because they think, well, if I actually meet a woman, I'm going to have to either give up my porn or tell her about it, so they don't go meet women. And if they're in a relationship, it often leads to a lot of hidden, secretive, shame-based behavior. So those are some biggies right there of the negative traits of nice guys.
Yeah, those are huge. And it really is, like you said at the beginning, it stems a lot from honesty and just being really honest and transparent. And I guess that lack of honesty is a reflection of the fear that they may be feeling about expressing themselves fully, and again, not being accepted or being lovable just because of the way they are, right?
And that's why I tell guys, go hang out with men, because that's where we can practice being honest and transparent and being who we are. And once we practice that with men, it's a lot easier to go back and do it in our intimate relationships. If we're straight with women, if we're gay with the guy we're closest to. So practice all of this stuff with Ben. And again, I love what you guys are doing of having these men's networks to let men practice being men with other men.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're doing. And it really does. It works. It's amazing. It's amazing what happens when you build relationships with other men, and you can express yourself. And especially, when you're separating the genders, it allows for a more safe space for men to express themselves, especially when there's assumed and actually enforced confidentiality within the groups, where nothing is going to leave that group and you trust the men. So you're building trust with the men because you're sharing things with them, and you're also working on that high level of honesty. And we'll definitely talk about the groups and some of the things we can do to help us with this nice guy syndrome in a little bit. And we touched on it briefly, but I wonder if you could add anything about how we got here. How did we get to this place of generations now of nice guys?
Well, you really, I think, spelled it out pretty well a little bit earlier in the conversation. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there's just economic change. We don't live on farms anymore. Boys don't grow up around dad, grandpa, uncle, cousins. We're just not around men very much. Right. We don't see what men do. Either dad is not here because he left, or we see him every other weekend, or he goes to a job, we don't know what he does, or he travels a lot. And so the big part is economic change of boys not growing up having an apprenticeship of being masculine with dad. As you mentioned, most of the first several years of life are around women. It's mom, babysitters, preschool, elementary school. I often do a poll of men and say, how many male teachers did you have between kindergarten and before you started middle school or junior high? And the average is about 1.5 men teachers. I had one.
Wow.
And so I tell guys, even graduating from 3rd grade to 4th grade, if you've had all women teachers, not only involves learning to read, write, and arithmetic, but it involves learning to please a woman. Because you got to please a woman to get to the 4th grade.
Right.
And so the educational system's part of it. Most of us, when we hit adolescence, and now we want to have a girlfriend. We want to impress the girls, maybe even have sex at some point. And most of us had no clue to go, how about doing it? Dating is actually not wired into our DNA. Dating has only existed probably not even 100 years. And 100 years ago, everybody married somebody they knew growing up. You married your neighbor. You married somebody you went to church with.
Sure.
And so when we hit that age of not knowing how to date, because most of us struggle and don't want to look foolish and don't want to be embarrassed, a lot of us then go into hyperdrive of nice guy mode. We think, okay, we've heard women complain about the jerks that they all seem to fall for. I'll be the nice guy. I'll let the woman get to know me. I'll treat her well. I'll do things for her. I'll listen to her talk. And then she'll see I'm a nice guy and want to be my girlfriend. Now, that's a whole other subject, but it doesn't actually work in terms of attracting women. But that actually is then what even then fuels more of that nice guy behavior of trying to actually get connected to females by trying to be nice and let them get to know us over time. And then lots of other things influence it, but I think those are the biggest core pieces.
Right. And where would you say, how do you say that the nice guy syndrome negatively impacts like men, maybe women, and maybe even on a grander kind of societal scale? Like, how do you think this negatively impacts the world around us?
Well, man, we can talk about this at several levels. Maybe the bigger level is one thing pretty consistent with nice guys is we tend to, I won't say lacking, but we've repressed our fierceness, just that bold, fierce, go get shit done, go do the right thing, go fight the Nazis in Europe, that's just not there anymore.
Yeah.
And it's because most of us, like I said, we're in the nursery. We're more connected to our feminine side. We want to be comfortable. We're proud of ourselves if we reach the higher level of Call of Duty or World of Warcraft or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so the bigger picture is there's just not that fierceness that the world needs. And kind of reflecting like my wife says, she wants a man who has some degree of fierceness. Does she want me to take it out on her? No. Does she want to know I can stand up to her? Yeah. My ex-wife used to say, how do I know you'll ever stand up for me if you can't even stand up to me? I mean, as a woman, she said, I don't feel safe because you have no fierceness.
Yeah.
So I think on the big picture is that. On the personal level of us men, I know that because of our nice guy syndrome, we play it safe, we don't take risks, we're not vulnerable, so we don't tend to live up to our potential, we won't get out of our comfort zone, we don't go into our passions because what if I fail, what if I'm not good enough, what if I make a mistake, what if my family talks me out of it? So it limits us in relationship and work and career because we're just kind of playing it safe. We're following that middle ground of trying to get approval and validation rather than going to kick ass at something.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And that definitely plays out in, and even like maybe like world politics. There's countries out there that are not afraid to go and kick ass, if you want to put it that way. Whereas like a lot of North Americans are very much more negotiate. They want to negotiate, which of course is always a good way to go before pulling the trigger.
But before we drop the big one,
yeah. So like negotiation, let's not downplay that. But at the same time, it's like there is a place for going out there and taking care of what needs to be taken care of, right? So
without getting too far into politics, I'll just give you an example. I remember I went to a workshop with David Data, and I recommend his book Way the Superior Man to everybody I work with. I went to a workshop with him, and it was when Obama and Hillary Clinton were running against each other in Democratic primaries. So this was 10 years ago. And he was talking about masculine and feminine energies. And he said, okay, we got these two candidates running for president of the United States. Which of the two would you say is more masculine? Everybody said, Hillary. Which is more feminine? Obama. Yeah. And without there being a judgment of it, she had more masculine traits, he had more feminine traits. Now what happened if Obama, if we maybe call him the nice guy, the more passive, the more feminine, the more trying to go along to get along, after 8 years of that, the country that, I vote in, elected a narcissist asshole jerk. It's kind of like, we've had enough of this energy. Let's go get somebody that'll kick ass. But now we've got somebody that can't make a rational decision to save his life because he's so much in his testosterone and his narcissism and his identity and ego all the time. Going from one extreme to another isn't helpful.
No.
What we really do need are men who walk the planet in a peaceful, calm, radiating way, who can respond to situations with appropriate fierceness when necessary.
Yes.
We don't have to walk around posturing. We don't have to walk around trying to fix and caretake everything.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I just want to throw out there real quick. Have you heard of Dr. Jordan Peterson as well, the University of Toronto psychology professor?
I'm not sure why that name keeps ringing a bell in my head, but I know I've bumped into the name, and a lot of times
Yeah.
people recommend people like.
Sure.
And
so the reason I bring him up is, again, he's another guy who's kind of exploded onto the scene in the past 6 to 8 months, and it's interesting how many men are gravitating towards what he has to say. And he told this story one time, and I'm just going to interject this really quick, but he told a story about a woman that wrote him a letter who kind of gave him an epiphanal idea, let's just say, of what he's actually doing to men. And the phrase she used was she's actually reigniting the divinity within men, the masculine divinity, in which case it's like that honorable male, like you said, like that doesn't need to puff up their chest, but at the same time can take care of business. And I definitely think that a lot of men have kind of been led astray. Again, funny enough, I took a women's study course in university. It's called Canadian Children, and she was the teacher herself was a feminist, and the class was full of women. But one thing I remember she said in that class was that the way we're raising men right now is doing them a great disservice. And she really did believe that, and I think it has manifested in a lot of unhealthy ways. So it's great to see this resurgence happening. And speaking about like the childhood development part of it, can we talk a little bit about why or how little boys start taking on some of these nice guys traits? Like in your book, it went from children are born helpless. They have a fear of abandonment. They're egocentric, and to deal with like the fear of being abandoned, they develop toxic shame. Could you maybe speak a little bit about just how that whole progression works and how that gets imprinted onto little boys?
Sure. And what I'm going to say applies to everybody, boys and girls. But I'll bring it back to especially nice guys. We are born vulnerable. There's one thing about the human species. I think we have one of the longest gestation periods and one of the longest maturation periods of any mammal. I think elephants are in the womb longer than humans, but I mean, nowadays, it used to be maybe about 12 to 14 years to get a little boy to maturity where he could take care of himself. My generation was about 18. Now it's about 35 for a boy to get where he can actually take care of himself. So it keeps getting longer and longer, I think, due to the factors we're talking about, mainly the feminization of boys, is that it takes longer for us to actually get out there and be able to take care of ourselves in the world. But here's what happens. When we're born, when all children are born, the human brain is very underdeveloped. But there's part of it that is pretty much fully developed, and that's the part related to survival. The brainstem, the amygdala, the part that relates to respiration, to heartbeat, to reaction to cold or even fear, anxiety. The part that around survival of flight, fight, or freeze is there, and that's all online. That those things developed in the human brain early in our evolutionary process. They're what developed first in human beings as in our individual development. So we're born, and our human brain, with this being the brain stem down here, and the amygdala in an adult is about the size of your little fingernail, with the rest of your brain being, size of a small coconut. And that little part drives the brain in many ways because it's wired into every part of the brain and wired directly into our senses of sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch. And so it gets information like that. And that's why you're driving your car and you see something out of the corner of your eye, and all of a sudden, without even knowing what it is, it grabs your attention, your heart's beating, your palms got sweaty, your respiration changed, the amygdala got triggered. That part is fully online at birth, and it reacts like that at birth. The thinking, reasoning part of your brain, at least in us males, they say, doesn't fully develop to about 25. Which is a good reason not to send 18-year-olds to war. But the part that reacts to threat And like I said, our biggest threat to a child is fear of abandonment, because that means death. I have no doubt that our earliest ancestors, if a child was born deformed, or if there was not enough food to go around, or if there was a threat, they probably threw the kids in a ditch. They were a burden. I have no doubt our ancestors did that. So I think it's wired into a baby's DNA. I don't want to get thrown into a ditch. That's death. Yeah. So what happens is, when we experience anxiety, our parents' anxiety, our own anxiety, when we're hungry and not fed, when we're cold and not held, when we're crying and not nurtured, if our parents are angry or depressed or physically abusive or non-available, all of those things get internalized into an infant's brain as, I am the cause of all of this that's happening to me. Children are very narcissistic in nature. Now, remember, the reasoning part of their brain isn't even online yet, so this is very a reactive part of the internalization. And the amygdala, that part down here in the brainstem, that's the size of your little fingernail, stores up emotional memory. It doesn't store up picture memory or word memory. It's all emotional memory that then is wired into the rest of the brain. And so what happens for little children is, when they experience painful, uncomfortable events, they can't think their way through it, and they can't act their way through it. So that at a very early, immature age, they try to do two things without really being aware that that's what they're doing. They try to soothe the uncomfortable feelings they're feeling. So there's one survival defense mechanism. How can I soothe these feelings? Now, they're not actually thinking it. It's purely fight, flight, or freeze. One of those three. The second survival defense mechanism that children develop is, how can I prevent these painful events from happening in the future? But it's still coming from a brain that doesn't think, only it fights, runs, or hides. So that is where every human being develops their internal reactions to the world. And then as we grow up and get older, 4 years old, 5 years old, 12 years old, 17, 25, 45, those internalized survival defense mechanisms that are trying to prevent, or that are either trying to soothe uncomfortable feelings or prevent them, are working all the time and are influencing the rest of the brain as our DOS, our operating system, for how we make decisions, how we form relationships, how we avoid anxiety, how we avoid being found out. And it affects everything that we do. But the thing is, we don't realize that. Every one of us, you and I, everybody walking this planet, believes that everything I think, perceive, interpret, decide is 100% rational and based on rational processing of what's happening around me. The truth is, it's not. It's all filtered through that amygdala part of our brain that's all about, how do I deal with this anxiety-producing situation? Do I run from it? Do I fight? Or do I duck and hide?
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating stuff to me. I was listening to another podcast with a gentleman named Dr. Robert Sapolsky, and he was talking about, he's a neuroscientist. Actually, he was on the Sam Harris podcast, like I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. And he was just talking about, they made a very strong argument on how, we don't have a lot of maybe free will, and people don't necessarily like that idea, but there's a lot of things that influence us from a very early age, at a time when we were not discerning adults and could filter out these things that get imprinted on us, and these things are affecting our decision making later on in life, right? So it's like, this is why you can really have compassion for people who act out badly, and maybe they not a baby's not born too messed up, really. They get imprinted on and made that way. So it's like, have a little compassion for the way people are and how they turn out, and realize that, everyone's they're really doing the best they can, I think, with what they have.
Well, and have compassion for ourselves. Like I said, I got a PhD in marriage and family therapy at 29. I'm on my third marriage. And I tell people, I've bumbled my way through every relationship I've had, because those unconscious dynamics affect who I'm attracted to, who I talk to. I tell people I'm amazingly attracted to unhappily married women. And why? Because my first love object, my mother, was an unhappily married woman. I was trained from a very early age to be very attentive to the emotional reactions of unhappily married women and try to respond to that and be the good man and make their lives better. That's what my mother trained me to do. And I've done that in one form or another, probably with every woman I've been with in my lifetime. Now, I think all my rational decisions are rational. They're not. Why would I rationally get involved with an unhappily married woman? I've done it at least twice. And it makes no sense, but it's driven by those unconscious dynamics that got stored up at a very early age.
Absolutely. Robert, I'm not even halfway through my notes because this work in this book is literally, it is huge. It's a monster undertaking for anybody to take on, but it's like, we hit on a really nice amount of it today. And before we wrap it up, I wanted to get into a little bit, well, what can we do? How can we, get over being a nice guy? What are some of the tools and techniques? And like, you mentioned all of them in your book. So, for one, download or pick up a copy of Robert's book because he goes through, I think there's like 44 or how many different exercises there are in that book you can work on.
There's a bunch of breaking free exercises at the back. There's a bunch of rules to live by.
Yeah.
And by the way, you mentioned the workshops that I'll be doing in Vancouver. And for those of us who are watching this before the workshops, in September of 2017, I'm sure you're going to have people watching this afterwards as well. The Saturday program that will be all men. We'll create that safe container for men. In the morning, I am going to talk about some of the things we've talked about, how we became nice guys. In the afternoon, we're going to talk about breaking free from the nice guy syndrome. It's going to be pretty condensed, but hopefully I'll condense it down to the things that guys can go out and plug into their lives right away. So I'll just hit on, just real quickly, some of the things we can do to break free. I've already mentioned, don't try to do it alone. Go connect with other people to help you do this work, whether it be a men's group, a therapist, a minister, life coach. Don't try to do it alone. Work at being honest. Make that a high priority to start working at being honest with you. Tell yourself the truth. No excuses. No, rationalizations. Work at being honest with you. Work at consciously making your needs a priority. You and I haven't talked much about that, but we will in the Saturday workshop. And my definition of a mature adult is somebody who takes full responsibility for getting their needs met. And we'll talk about how to do that and how to build reciprocal support systems to help you get your needs met as you walk the planet. We'll talk about becoming aware of and letting go of covert contracts, those if-then deals that we make with everybody. So that's in a nutshell. Go get help to help you do this. Connect with men. Work at telling the truth. Work at making your needs a priority. And that's a pretty good roadmap to get started.
I think it's fantastic. Like you said, you touched on like the covered contracts. I wanted to get into that. But the good thing is you are coming to Vancouver and you will be hosting this workshop 2 nights on the 21st and on the 23rd. If anybody wants to connect with that, go visit mantalks.com. Or in the link that I'll have on this video on Facebook, it'll be linked right to the tickets if you want to check that out, which I highly recommend you do. And the cool thing is too, there'll be I know at least 2 men's groups represented there. There'll be the Man Talks Masterminds, which I'm currently a part of. The Samurai Brotherhood guys, they're showing up, and they're another very functional men's group within the city, and I know those guys will be there. So once you get a little taste for this work, you can actually potentially link up with those groups again. And or maybe even start a No More Mr. Nice Guy group, right? I'm sure those kicking around there too. So there's lots of avenues that you can pursue to take on this work. So yes, anything else you'd like to add in there today?
Andy, I just appreciate you inviting me on. And if people want to find me, just go to drglover.com, which is drglove.com. And there is a link on my website to the program in Vancouver. But my website talks about my online university, self-help courses, my podcast directed at almost all levels of recovery from the nice guy syndrome. I've got No More Mr. Nice Guy certified coaches and therapists all over the world that are listed there. So yeah, just go poke around at drglover.com, and hopefully I'll see you in Vancouver in a couple months. Actually, just about a month from now.
Yeah, it's an excellent resource for sure. We're getting just about a month from today. You'll be here, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I will be.
I'll release this episode. Well, I'll release it on Monday, so it'll come out pretty soon. But also if you liked what you heard today, please give us a rating and review on iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher. It really helps the podcast get found. from what I've heard, there's over 1 million podcasts out there on iTunes right now. So anything that we can do to get noticed is much appreciated. So if you're with us to the very end, thanks for listening. We also have the Vancouver Real meetups, which are running every single month. And on Saturday, we're actually going for a big hike up to the Chief and Squamish, followed by some axe throwing. So feel free to link up with the Vancouver Real community at vancouverreal.tv. So Dr. Robert Glover, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you in Vancouver.
Andy, thank you. We'll see you soon.
Excellent.